The Subcommittee on Border Security, Facilitation, and Operations will come to order. The subcommittee is meeting to hear federal government perspectives on addressing the challenge of unaccompanied children arriving at the U.S.-Mexico border. Today's hearing is a follow-up to this subcommittee's April hearing. We examined the care of unaccompanied children in federal custody and received recommendations from non-governmental stakeholders on the way forward. As we heard in April, both Democratic and Republican administrations have been confronted with the challenge of unaccompanied children arriving from Mexico, Central America, and farther abroad. Migrants, including migrant children, take the perilous journey north to escape unspeakable conditions and dangers at home. Just yesterday, CBP released its operational update for May, showing that CBP is encountering record numbers of migrants at our southern border. Many are fleeing from gang violence and threats to their lives, as well as natural disasters that have devastated their home countries. The pandemic has exacerbated these conditions. While the vast majority are single adults who attempt to enter the United States again and again, the number of families and children seeking assistance remains high. However, it's important to put these numbers into context. While more encounters are happening at our border than in previous years, CBP encountered fewer individual people last month than during the last influx in May of 2019 under the Trump administration. In addition, CBP encountered about 40,000 more children and families in May of 2019 than they did last month. And encounters with children and families continue to decrease. Nonetheless, building the capacity to humanely process those arriving at our border remains a challenge. As we move forward, we must remember that the children, in particular, are extremely vulnerable. We must ensure they have access to all available legal protections here in the United States, as well as examine ways to provide protections closer to home. This is why I'm pleased to have witnesses from the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of State before us to testify on the administration's efforts to provide humane care and protections for unaccompanied children. Over the last few months, the Biden administration has ramped up efforts to quickly transfer children from Customs and Border Protection custody to the Department of Health and Human Services. The Biden administration has also rapidly built capacity at DHS, particularly CBP, to provide proper care for migrant children. Capacity building has included the hiring of dozens of Border Patrol processing coordinators to help with the care, custody, and processing of children, along with expanding the department's medical contract and contract for child care services. While not present today, I'd also like to highlight the extraordinary work of Health and Human Services in quickly expanding their capacity to receive unaccompanied kids. Coordination has also improved across the interagency, helping expedite the processing and placement of children at our southern border. Finally, the Department of State has also been working to build the capacity of our neighbors to protect these children at home. Their works include restarting the Central American Minors Program that allows children to seek protection within their home country, supporting efforts to root out corruption within foreign governments, and overseeing investments into job training and other programs designed to help women and youth. However, I remain concerned with the initial delay of these efforts, which resulted in thousands of children being held in CBP custody for days and sometimes weeks. The Department of Homeland Security saw signs of influx building as early as April of 2020. Under the Trump administration, the department apparently ignored these warning signs and chose not to build the capacity needed to safely process and care for vulnerable migrants. Thankfully, the Biden-Harris administration has taken swift whole of government action, but we must be prepared to handle not only the current influx, but also implement long-term solutions to the challenge. We do not want to be faced with the same challenge again in 5 years. We must work together to create humane and effective border policies that prioritize the treatment of people in federal government custody. It is our legal and moral duty to ensure these children, no matter where they come from, are treated humanely and have full access to protections guaranteed them under law. While we've seen impressive progress over the last few months, there is no doubt more needs to be done. I look forward to hearing today from the witnesses, from the administration on the efforts to respond to this challenge. The chairwoman would now like to recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Higgins of Louisiana, for an opening statement.
Day. It's an important hearing. I'd like to attempt to frame this for Americans that are observing this hearing. The current crisis at our southwest border is worse than the migrant surges in both 2014 and 2019. So I'd like to touch on appropriations. Both of those surges resulted in emergency supplemental funding from Congress. We have yet to receive such a request during this current surge and crisis. Despite the fact that on trips to the border, members have heard about fast depleting resources at Border Patrol facilities. I have serious concerns that funds appropriated by Congress for national security are being rerouted to address a humanitarian crisis at the border without being properly replenished. Vice President Harris was appointed to lead efforts to stop the crisis at the border. However, she has yet to witness what's happening firsthand. President Biden has yet to visit the border or facilities holding unaccompanied minors, a topic of discussion for today, part of the humanitarian crisis. We'll cover it in depth today. But since his inauguration, our president has not been there. So interviews with Border Patrol agents have resulted in the reasonable acceptance of the simple fact that migrants are directly responding to Biden administration's policies. It is why they're getting into pipelines. I'd like to frame this for America. The, the Biden campaign messages to his base became the Biden White House policies that we're witnessing right now. The cartels began filling their pipeline to maximum capacity last year after November. We're now well into 2021. Every illegal immigrant that's in the pipeline right now has arranged their passage and paid for their passage through that pipeline, that illegal pipeline of human beings and drugs. They put themselves in that pipeline since the Biden administration was inaugurated, and certainly since November of last year. So what we're witnessing right now is layers of crisis. We're discussing a humanitarian crisis today, and we will get into it in depth, unaccompanied children. But we have a national sovereignty crisis as well. We have lost the sovereignty and control of our southern border. We must maintain our sovereignty as a nation, or all can be lost. The humanitarian crisis is in the focus right now, and it should be, because we're a loving, compassionate, generous nation, and we must deal with the sorrow and the pain and the extreme hardship that these children of God are facing as they come into our country illegally. But we have to do this with a balance, enforcing our laws. We have a constitutional crisis because we have a federal government that's mandating to our sovereign states and interfering with the enforcement of their own laws and their own right to protect their own sovereignty. We have a criminal crisis because the percentage of getaways has increased as the law enforcement has been overwhelmed at the border. These are numbers that are only estimated; they can't be accurately assessed. But our best measure is that it's higher than it's been in modern history, and the illegal immigrants that want to escape Border Patrol are the ones generally that are criminally involved with drug trafficking or human trafficking. So we have a criminal crisis that we're dealing with. Our committee certainly has a responsibility, and let me clarify it for the people. This committee has a duty to force action from the executive branch where we feel that its policies are lacking or injurious. This is true at any time, regardless of what party is in power. I look forward to bipartisan solutions. I respect our chairwoman's leadership, and I envision a bipartisan endeavor here that will result in actual answers for the American people because they certainly deserve it. Madam Chair, I yield.
I thank the ranking member. I do take issue, unfortunately, with your description of an illegal pipeline of human beings and drugs. And hopefully that'll be a conversation we could have with our witnesses. These are people, and these are people that are coming to make use of asylum laws that we have in this country, and that's legal to do. So hopefully, Mr. Ranking
Will
Member.
the gentlelady yield for
Yes.
one sentence response? Yes, ma'am. The pipeline, the cartel pipeline, as has been commonly referred to for a couple of decades as the human and drug trafficking pipeline. Runs from Venezuela through Colombia, the Darien Gap, Panama, Central America, and Mexico to our southern border. That's a pipeline. Nothing passes without paying the cartel, human beings and drugs. So my commitment to a compassionate response to the children of God that are suffering and crossing our southern border illegally has been well stated.
Well,
However,
Mr.
the
Ranking Member,
use
you and I
the
will
pipeline
disagree,
as a
and
description is
Mr.
accurate.
Mr. Higgins, I just wanted to note that I was hoping that, as you mentioned at the outset of your comments, this would be a productive bipartisan conversation, but it doesn't help when we start to villainize immigrants, and I think that's where I was trying to get at. And so we don't have to hash it out now. Hopefully, we'll get information from our witnesses today that will help that situation out. With that said, we're going to move on. Members are reminded that the subcommittee will operate according to the guidelines laid out by the chairman and the ranking member in their July 8th colloquy. The chair now recognizes the chairman of the full committee, the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Thompson, for an opening statement. Is Mr. Thompson available? I don't see him here. Let's give him a second here.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr. Cleaver.
He was just in at another meeting, so I'm assuming that he's trying to get back over here.
Okay. Thank you. And with that, is Mr. Katko, the full committee's ranking member, available for an opening statement? I don't see him.
I am available,
Oh,
yes.
there you are. Mr. Katko, the ranking member of the full committee, you are now recognized, the gentleman from New York, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm pleased that this subcommittee is holding a hearing today on a topic all of us care deeply about, the welfare of children crossing the southwest border. Some of these children arrive alone and afraid with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Others arrive with loved ones hoping for a better life in the United States. Many children making the dangerous journey to the United States face tragic circumstances of abuse, illness, violence, and trafficking along the way. Increasingly, drug cartels use children as pawns to distract Border Patrol agents as illicit drugs are smuggled across the border. I've now taken 2 trips to the southern border in the last couple of months. And I also lived on the southwest border as a federal organized crime prosecutor going after cartels in the mid-1990s, so I'm intimately familiar with their well-worn drug trafficking habits, and they haven't changed over the decades. Like I said, I've taken 2 trips to the border, and that's something that has not been done by either President Biden nor Vice President Harris, who was tasked with trying to clean up the mess created by this administration. The stories my colleagues and I heard from the frontline men and women of Homeland Security about the dueling humanitarian, security, and public health crises were incredibly disturbing. With CBP encountering more than 14,000 unaccompanied children and single minors at the southwest border in May 2021 alone, approximately 14 times the number encountered in the same month just 1 year ago. Think about that, 14 times more. That's an already strained workforce continues to face a lack of capacity and resources to effectively manage this crisis. Additionally, I'm troubled that the Biden administration has reportedly removed important protections related to vetting the sponsors to whom unaccompanied children are released, while also waiving background check requirements for caregivers at migrant care facilities. These troubling changes in policy are doubly concerning amongst recent reports of abuse at these facilities. Moreover, as we anticipate changes to enforcement of Title 42 public health authorities at the border, and with the elimination of the critical Remain in Mexico policy, our frontline law enforcement officers are being undermined by their own government's policies at a time when they need more resources and more support, not less. And that's not coming from me, and that's coming from them. And if the president and the vice president went to border, they'd be told just that. The president's budget proposal allows for not a single additional Border Patrol agent, despite a 20-year high in migrant numbers. Meanwhile, the vice president speaks in vague, hollow terms about what the U.S. is doing long-term down in Guatemala, while dismissing calls for her to visit the southwest border. Unaccompanied children are suffering at the hands of human smugglers on their dangerous journey. In short, they're being exploited. Those that make it into the United States are often exploited by cartels and gangs. I hope that this hearing today will be an honest examination of the conditions facing these children on the ground, as well as the challenges facing the frontline men and women of our Homeland Security working amidst dire circumstances. Before I close, I do want to note this. In the city of Syracuse alone, we have some of the highest concentrations of poverty in the United States of America. And those pockets of poverty exist all across this country. And as an organized crime prosecutor in Syracuse, prosecuting gang cases, I saw firsthand the devastating effects of this extreme poverty on our communities. And it often leads to a life of crime and an early death for these kids. It's tragic. Money that could be spent to help these kids, American citizen children, are instead being used to deal with a crisis at the border that this administration created on January 20th. There's not an agent that works on the border that will tell you anything other than the fact that everything changed on January 20th when the president changed his those executive orders. And I really hope that we have a sober discussion about that today. This is not a Democratic issue or Republican issue. And as you all know, I'm one of the most bipartisan members in Congress. But we are doing a very major disservice to our communities by ignoring the challenges at the border. I do want to thank our witnesses for appearing today before the committee, and I yield back the balance of my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ranking Member. I now welcome our panel of witnesses. David Shulian is the Assistant Secretary for Border Security and Immigration at the Department of Homeland Security's Office of Strategy, Policy, and Plans. In his role, Mr. Shulian coordinates and develops policy for DHS headquarters and component heads. Mr. Benjamin Kerry Huffman is the Executive Assistant Commissioner of Enterprise Services for U.S. Customs and Border Protection. In his role, Mr. Huffman oversees component-wide efforts to improve and increase collaboration among CBP offices that provide services to frontline operators. Catherine Duholm is the Acting Deputy Assistant Secretary for Western Hemisphere Affairs at the U.S. Department of State. In her role, Ms. Duholm is responsible for U.S. engagement with Mexico and Central America. Patrick Lichtliner is the Acting Executive Associate Director for Homeland Security Investigations at U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. In his role, he oversees the principal investigative component of the Department of Homeland Security that is responsible for investigating and disrupting transnational criminal organizations and terrorist networks seeking to exploit U.S. customs or immigration laws. Without objection, the witnesses' full statements will be inserted in the record. I now ask each witness to summarize his or her statement for 5 minutes, beginning with Mr. Shahulian. My apologies.
No worries. Chairwoman Barragan, Ranking Member Higgins, Chairman Thompson, Ranking Member Katko, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. It is an honor to update the subcommittee on what the administration is doing to address the needs of the border, and specifically the needs of unaccompanied children. As Secretary Mayorkas has said, DHS is working tirelessly to manage the surge of migrants at the southwest border. Every day, the brave men and women of the department take the steps necessary to restore safe and orderly processing across the border. Although migrant encounters dropped at the beginning of the pandemic, encounters overall have been rising since April 2020, when public health-related restrictions were first implemented at the border and throughout the region. Between April 2020 and January 2021, we saw a 1,000% increase in apprehensions along the southwest border. In April 2021, CBP encountered 178,000 individuals at the southwest border. Of these, 17,000 were unaccompanied children. These numbers are challenging, but at the same time, we must note that they do overstate migration flows. Due to the use of Title 42 expulsion authority, the rate of repeat encounters, particularly among single adults, has been much higher than normal. Although we are seeing more total encounters than in the peak of 2019, the number of unique encounters remains lower than it was then. Of course, this fact does not reduce the impact of total encounters on the department or its personnel, but it is a reminder that encounter numbers do not tell the whole story and that migration surges have varied and complicated causes. One thing is clear: the decision made by families and children to undertake the dangerous journey does not come lightly, and it underscores the need for a comprehensive regional approach for addressing regular migration. Among other things, we must deal with the factors that cause people to flee in the first place, including the ongoing violence, corruption, natural disasters, and lack of basic opportunities that plague various countries in the region. We must also provide alternative lawful avenues for migration and for finding other forms of safety in the region. We must increase the capacity of countries in that hemisphere to take displaced persons. And we must overhaul and streamline our procedures for processing individuals and adjudicating asylum claims at the border. Efforts in each of these areas are already underway. By working closely with partners in the region and with a whole of government approach, we can holistically address the situation in the region and at the border. The work we have already accomplished with unaccompanied children is an example of what we can achieve. Over the last several months, Secretary Mayorkas directed various parts of DHS to support an all-of-government effort to address the needs of children. As part of these efforts, FEMA worked with HHS to significantly expand emergency influx shelter capacity. DHS established an interagency movement coordination cell to bring together colleagues across FEMA, CBP, ICE, USCIS, and HHS to streamline operations in support of the rapid transfer of unaccompanied children from CBP to OR custody. USCIS provided hundreds of officers to help interview and vet potential sponsors, and DHS has provided hundreds of volunteers to assist CBP and HHS with oversight and logistics. Due to these efforts, we have completely transformed the processing of unaccompanied children. On March 29 of this year, more than 5,700 children were in Border Patrol stations. As of June 8, there were 514. On March 29th, more than 4,000 children were held over the 72-hour legal limit. As of June 8, there were none. On March 29th, the average time of a child in a Border Patrol station was 133 hours. As of June 8, it was 21. Addressing the needs of unaccompanied children is an important step, but it also highlights the need for long-term solutions, including ones that provide legal and safe alternatives to the dangerous journey that so many have decided to attempt. Unfortunately, some of these very programs were dismantled by the last administration. But this president and this administration have made it clear that we are committed to rebuilding our nation's immigration system and reforming immigration policies in a manner that is consistent with our laws and with our values as a nation. As Secretary Mayorkas has said, our goal is a safe, legal, and orderly immigration system that is based on our bedrock priorities: to keep our border secure, address the plight of children as the law requires, assess asylum claims as required by law, and enable families to be together. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you for your testimony. I'm seeing that the chairman of the full committee has returned. I am going to now recognize the chairman of the full committee, the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Thompson, for an opening statement before we resume witness testimony. Mr. Chairman, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I apologize, but I have three balls in the air at the same time, and so it's a little difficult. But also, I thank you for holding this hearing and your continued leadership on border security issues, and for holding today's follow-up hearing on the challenges posed by unaccompanied children at the border. People, including unaccompanied children, have been arriving at our southern border for decades, under both Democratic and Republican administrations. I'm grateful for the Biden administration's efforts to ensure that unaccompanied children are able to receive proper care and access to protections guaranteed under United States law. DHS, HHS, and other federal agencies are working closely with local communities and non-governmental organizations to provide temporary shelter, essential medical care, legal services, and COVID-19 testing for unaccompanied children. The Vice President and the State Department are also working with foreign governments, the private sector, and other organizations to bolster the capacity of our neighbors to provide youth and vulnerable populations with opportunities and protection at home. The administration is also restarting the Central American Minors Program to allow unaccompanied children to apply for protection in their home country. If they qualify, children will then be able to make a safe and orderly journey to the U.S. All of these efforts are concrete steps that will not only help children who arrive at our border, but also address many of the push factors forcing children to make the dangerous journey. Border security remains a priority for this committee. We can secure our border and process people humanely and effectively. I'm grateful to Secretary Mayorkas and the Biden administration for leading us in that direction. Despite the claims of some of my colleagues, we do not need to return to the inhumane, cruel, and untimely, ineffective policies of the Trump administration. As we all recall, in his first year in office, President Trump piloted and later implemented programs that separated thousands of children from their parents. This anti-immigrant trend continued, with the Trump administration's instituting policies like the migrant protection protocols that failed to address the root causes of migration and left migrants languishing in camps in Mexico. In fact, we still have a long road ahead to repair the systems decimated by the Trump administration. During the COVID-19 pandemic, the Trump administration ignored the warning signs of another migration influx and instead issued a so-called public health order, also known as Title 42. Title 42 has resulted in thousands of migrants, including unaccompanied children and young families, being expelled from the United States without due process. Most were sent back to Mexico without any access to the asylum protections provided for under United States law. Many have tried to cross the border again and again, and the numbers we are seeing now are in large part due to this policy. The Biden administration rightly exempted unaccompanied children from this order. However, I remain concerned that Title 42 is still being implemented, particularly for families and other vulnerable populations. Recently, the department improved the process by providing vulnerable individuals with exceptions to the Title 42 policy. It's a step in the right direction, but the program is still very small. Last month, the New York Times published a whistleblower complaint detailing how families are sending their minor children across the border alone, increasing the number of unaccompanied children in federal government custody. I strongly urge the administration to review Title 42 and take actions to ensure that families are not faced with this terrible choice. I'm eager to hear from our government witnesses today on ways the Biden administration is handling the challenges of unaccompanied children arriving at our southern border, as well as the long-term efforts being implemented and considered to address the root causes of migration. I'm also interested to hear how we can better position the federal government to respond and manage future influxes. Thank you, Madam Chairman. I appreciate your indulgence while I'm multitasking today. Thank you much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A number of us are as well, so I appreciate that. Thank you. And now we will resume to witness testimony. I would like to recognize Mr. Huffman to summarize his statement for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Badagan, Ranking Member Higgins, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today on behalf of U.S. Customs and Border Protection. It is my honor to illustrate how CBP cares for unaccompanied children, or UCs, in our temporary custody. Our goal is to transfer, transport, release, repatriate individuals, especially UCs, as expeditiously as possible. The best thing we can do for these children is to advocate for them to be moved quickly into the long-term care of HHS. We are committed to balancing our border security mission with providing safe and humane conditions for those who are in our temporary custody. However, CBP facilities have always been intended for short-term temporary holding, historically for single adults. Our legacy facilities were not designed for the increase of UCs arriving at our southwest border or for the COVID-19 health and safety measures. Despite the challenges COVID-19 presents, we continue to advocate for the efficient processing and expeditious transfer of UCs to HHS. But we must have our interagency partners like ICE and HHS at the table. Collaborating with our trusted partners and other lessons learned from past surges have led us to some of our greatest improvements in our response. This past March presented us with the highest number of UCs encountered along our southwest border to date. There were over 18,700 UCs encountered in March alone. By late March, the number of UCs entering CBP custody had far exceeded HHS's capacity to provide timely placement in its facilities. With this increase, we collaborated with CBP and across the interagency on the multiple lines of effort. Working closely with our interagency partners helps us expeditiously transfer UCs, as these movements require multiple operational decisions, many of which are outside of CBP's domain. To streamline the transfers, the Movement Coordination Cell, or MCC, was established at CBP headquarters in late March. The MCC is a multi-agency effort that mobilizes CBP, ICE, HHS, DOD, and FEMA resources to move UCs out of CBP custody and into HHS's care as fast as possible, but within 72 hours. By establishing the MCC, we have been able to significantly reduce the number of UCs in CBP temporary custody and the time in custody to under 72 hours. In March, the average number of UCs in temporary CBP custody was over 4,000. Today, the average is under 700, but more importantly, the average time in custody went from 115 hours in March to just 20 hours today. We also learned from the 2019 surge that we needed to streamline the acquisition process so we could efficiently stand up new soft-sided facilities. We developed standardized contracts with tiered, scalable options to enable us to quickly meet our facility needs. Prior to this year, CBP awarded a blanket purchase agreement for soft-sided facilities, which allowed us to swiftly stand up 6 facilities in Arizona and Texas. Almost all of these facilities include indoor and outdoor play areas with games, toys, age-appropriate food, and televisions for entertainment. We also contracted bilingual caregivers to provide personal care and basic hygiene for the children. To meet increased processing demand, CBP deployed our agents and officers from across the country to our southwest borders, and DHS activated the volunteer force. We also prioritized medical support and have continued to expand the scope and scale of CBP's medical support services. CBP's contract medical personnel are trained, licensed, and credentialed to care for children. We're developing additional training for in-trauma informed care for our frontline officers and agents. Children who are in our temporary custody receive health intake interviews and medical assessments that include trauma-informed behavioral health considerations. These allow us to identify children's health issues that may require further attention. We constantly work to identify ways that we may further improve our medical support efforts. We continue to make improvements from the past migration surges, and it is my personal belief that CBP advocates best for the best possible care for the children who come into our temporary custody. We assess our performances, processes, and procedures for improvement and work to refine our whole of government approach as trusted partners across the federal agencies. I can attest to the empathy of the CBP workforce. These men and women are dedicated not only to the mission, but to ensuring children are cared for with compassion while they are in our temporary custody. I am proud to be here today to represent the men and women of CBP, and thank you for the opportunity to appear here today. I look forward to your questions.
Well, thank you for your testimony. I would now like to recognize Ms. Duholm to summarize her statement for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairwoman. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Cathco, Ranking Member Higgins, distinguished members of the subcommittee, and my fellow panelists. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here with you today to talk about this important issue. I really welcome the opportunity to further discuss how we're managing unaccompanied children at the border. I believe we have a common goal here, and that is how to humanely manage migration while looking after the most vulnerable among us, and that's the children of our region. I'd like to use my testimony today to summarize for you the State Department's role in this process. You will have seen, of course, that we have had a lot of engagement in the region recently, including Vice President Harris's trip to Guatemala and Mexico. Last week, Secretary Blinken was in Costa Rica meeting with his counterparts from throughout the region and Mexico. Special Envoy Zuniga has made numerous trips to the region, and I had the opportunity to travel to Honduras and El Salvador just a few weeks ago, where I spoke with officials, met with civil society, private sector, and others on the ground, was able to observe some of our projects that were put in place to address some of these challenges. Today, we have a delegation meeting at the regional meeting of the Comprehensive Refugee Response Framework in Costa Rica, where they're further exploring opportunities to work collaboratively to address these issues. Our engagements are driven by the Executive Order 14010, which calls for a holistic approach to this migration challenge. So what that means is that not only are my colleagues on the panel working on immigration challenges, our policy and controls at the border, but that we also need to be looking at how to manage migration flows from throughout the region, as well as getting at the factors that are causing people to seek to make that dangerous journey to begin with. The State Department is engaged in two strategies to address these challenges. The first that I'd like to discuss is the Comprehensive Migration Strategy, Comprehensive Migration Management Strategy. There are two M's there. We are working to collaboratively strengthen migration management throughout the region with our partners. And what that entails is focusing on fostering secure and humane border management, working to provide increased protection options, opening up opportunities for legal pathways for migration, and also providing reintegration and assistance to those who have been returned from our borders so that they don't seek to make that journey again. We're working collaboratively towards that end, and we believe that those can make a real difference in addressing the migration flows. But what we really have to do to get at what's causing that is also to look at the root causes, which is our second strategy, the root causes of migration strategy. In this strategy, we are taking a whole of government approach where we're looking at a community-based, targeted, focused strategy to work with communities to address the things that are causing people to leave their homes to seek a better future. We've spoken with migrants, with would-be migrants, as well as with the communities in these countries to learn what is causing this migration flow. And so we're going to be concentrating the root causes strategy on some of those key areas. That includes security concerns, lack of economic opportunity, safeguarding the rights of citizens, and addressing corruption and governance challenges. And I do want to underline that latter part because we recognize that addressing those challenges will be central to our ability to achieve success in any of the other areas. So we will continue to focus on corruption and transparency challenges as we move forward with both of these strategies. Congress is a key partner in this, and we look forward to working closely with you. I welcome the opportunity to work with you in the weeks and months ahead, and I look forward to your questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. I now recognize Mr. Lechleitner to summarize his statement for 5 minutes.
Chairwoman Barragan, Ranking Member Higgins, and distinguished members of the Subcommittee on Border Security, Facilitation, and Operations. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today and discuss the efforts of Homeland Security investigations to secure our homeland from transnational crime and threats, and to elaborate on HSI's investigative role in preventing the smuggling and trafficking of people, including unaccompanied children, into the United States. As the principal investigative arm of the Department of Homeland Security, Our core mission is to protect the United States from transnational crime and threats. The crimes of smuggling and trafficking align with many of HSI's operational priorities and are a primary focus of HSI's investigations. Human smuggling involves providing a service, typically transportation, navigation, or fraudulent documents to facilitate an individual's unauthorized entry into a foreign country. Human smuggling organizations profit by charging fees for smuggling non-citizens into and throughout the United States and by collecting transit fees when smugglers and their clients travel through territory controlled by cartels or other TCOs. These criminal networks are almost exclusively driven by money, seeing humans as just another commodity to be moved across borders for profit. While human smuggling may constitute the initial crime facilitating the illicit movement of people, including minors, to our borders, the criminality does not stop there. In some cases, migrants become victims of human or labor trafficking when criminal networks introduce force, fraud, or coercion into smuggling schemes to bring victims into forced labor or commercial sex. If the victim is under 18, sex trafficking occurs when the victim is induced to perform commercial sex. Force, fraud, or coercion is not required. To be clear, trafficking is a crime of exploitation, does not require movement across a border. Additionally, HSI's investigations have determined that human smuggling often occurs alongside or can be a precursor to other transnational crimes such as gang activity, identity benefit fraud, money laundering, bulk cash smuggling, narcotic smuggling, arms trafficking, and terrorism and national security related crime, among others. The complex transnational nature of the crime surrounding human smuggling requires a strong and layered investigative response, which HSI implements on multiple fronts. This starts abroad, where HSI has the largest international investigative presence within DHS, comprised of 80 offices in over 50 countries. HSI special agents assigned to our attaché offices work with our foreign law enforcement counterparts to investigate and prosecute TCOs operating abroad, while conducting capacity building efforts designed to enhance the capabilities of host country partners to prevent cross-border crime at the earliest point of the smuggling event. HSI's Transnational Criminal Investigative Units, TCIUs, the Biometric Identification Transnational Migration Alert Program, BITMAP, Operation Citadel, and the Extraterritorial Criminal Travel Program, ECT, are key elements of HSI's international efforts designed to push our borders out and effectively identify and mitigate threats before they reach the United States. HSI's efforts continue at the border and within the hundreds of domestic field offices throughout the United States, where HSI special agents respond to and investigate potential human smuggling and trafficking crimes. These investigative leads come to us in a variety of ways, including border interdictions, referrals from local law enforcement partners, confidential informants and sources of information, tip line or social media reporting, community and public outreach, criminal analysis, and information gleaned from existing operations. HSI develops and receives information and leads involving human smuggling and trafficking in the same way, regardless of UC involvement. Upon receiving information into a potential violation, we use all our authorities and expertise to pursue and investigate and attack all aspects of organizations responsible. These efforts are supported by the HSI Victim Assistance Program, which enables HSI to take a victim-centered approach to its investigations, working with all levels of government and NGOs to provide necessary services to identified victims. Additionally, the HSI-led DHS Center for Countering Human Trafficking is another important operational support element, integrating the effort of 16 DHS component agencies and offices to centralize and coordinate diverse functions, all in support of investigations, victim protection efforts, outreach, and training activities focused on combating the scourge of human trafficking. Together, HSI's efforts to combat cross-border crime facilitates and enhances the application of our full range of authorities that enable us and our partners to maximize the disruptive effort against TCOs engaged in smuggling and trafficking. These efforts help secure our borders and uphold the national security and public safety of the United States. Thank you again for the opportunity to appear before you today and for your continued support of HSI and the critical investigative role it plays in investigating the TCOs that facilitate and profit from human smuggling, trafficking, and related crimes. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. I want to thank the witnesses for their testimony. I'll remind the subcommittee that we will each have 5 minutes to question the panel. I will now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Yesterday, CBP released its operational update for May 2021, which showed a record number of encounters at the southern border. Mr. Shahulian, can you put this number into perspective and describe who is presenting at the border and the trends that DHS is observing?
Sure. Thank you for the question. I'd be happy to, Chairwoman. So we are seeing very high numbers of encounters. As you indicated, we saw 180,000 in May. What we are seeing is that is largely led by single adults, and that there's a high level of repeat encounters among single adults. And what we're seeing is that basically half of the encounters that we're seeing of total encounters are unique encounters. So there's essentially a 50% repeat encounter rate for single adults. What we have seen in May is that the trend for decreased numbers of unaccompanied children and families did continue. So we are seeing a continued downward trend in those numbers. I think what we can say is that although the numbers, again, I think just if we're going to compare these numbers, and I know to, for example, prior surges like the surge in 2019, although we have again, higher numbers of total encounters, the number of unique encounters is lower.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Mr. Huffman, over the last few months, CBP has worked to quickly build its capacity to handle unaccompanied children. This includes standing up multiple soft-sided facilities, deploying volunteers to help with processing, and expanding child care services contracts. What additional efforts is CBP undertaking to support the care and custody of unaccompanied children they encounter?
Thank you for that question, and I appreciate the opportunity to address that, because it's been from my perspective and my years of experience, this has kind of been a big success for us, because we've had to deal with surges of unaccompanied children before, and has not been as successful at moving them out of our custody. I think what's important to understand is that is how we manage unaccompanied children is a whole of government effort. It's not just CBP's challenge, it's HHS's challenge, and all those that help us along. So what the thing that we did differently this time was when we stood up we applied it more of a whole of government approach this time, that when we stood up the MCC and we got FEMA in the room, we got HHS in the room, us in the room, and ICE in the room, we're able to come up with better solutions to move these folks out. We did several things. We had to move large volumes of people. FEMA assisted them in setting up their to build their capacity, but you build capacity two ways. You build capacity by increasing your real estate, and you build capacity by increasing your efficiency. So we attacked it both ways. We were able to stand up capacity to move large groups of kids out, but at the same time, we fine-tuned our efficiencies to where we could focus on folks that were difficult to move. We started an initiative where we would every day, in addition to large movements, that we would start with the top 15 children in our custody that's been there the longest, and personalize each one of those children until we could get them moved out, find out what unique problems we were having getting them to HHS custody, and did that. And we did it by developing what we call an advocacy mentality for each child in our custody and driving those numbers down to move them out. So I think the best thing we did, in addition to the medical services you mentioned, the food and the care and those things, was to get out a process to give them out of our custody as fast as possible and into the hands of child care professionals at HHS. Still think, and do to this day, that is the best thing we can do, is maximize our process and our efficiencies to move them on to those who are truly trained to deal with them. Apart from the fact that we did increase our capabilities with caregivers, medical contracts, medical services, and all those things across. So
thank you. Thank you, sir. Ms. Duholm, to address the challenge at our southern border, the Biden administration instituted a whole of government and whole of community effort. It brought in hundreds of federal government volunteers and coordinated with local government and organizations to help provide care for migrants. Similarly, a global approach will be needed to address the root causes of migration. Please describe what outreach the Biden administration has done to other foreign governments or international organizations to help address the root causes of migration. And maybe you can touch a little bit upon how the efforts have been impacted by the pandemic.
Sure. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. We have been doing a great deal of outreach to the governments in the region. I mentioned earlier some of the in-person visits that we've had, but we've also, of course, have our embassies in the region continuously engaging with our partners out in the region. We also engage very regularly through our missions with communities, and we have undertaken, as part of the root causes strategy, a very deliberate process of outreach to the communities. And one thing that's kind of interesting about the pandemic is, in some ways, while it's made it difficult to bring people together in person, I've had the opportunity, for instance, to speak with groups in the countries, both youth groups and faith groups and civil society groups via the miracle of virtual meetings. So we've conducted a number of those sorts of meetings, as well as with civil society here in the US. From the State Department, just as part of this root causes strategy, we have consulted over 35 different civil society organizations, and some of those are umbrella groups that include dozens of different civil society groups. So we really are focused on getting as broad a range as possible of consultations to best understand the challenges that are driving this and the solutions that can present themselves.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I apologize, my time has expired, and we're looking forward to hearing more from your testimony with other questions from the other panelists. I now would like to recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee, the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Higgins, for questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And again, I thank our witnesses for being here today. Madam Chair, obviously, a massive increase in illegal border crossings is going to include a massive increase of unaccompanied children illegally crossing the border. This should not be a surprise. We're dealing with historically high illegal crossings at our southern border. It's a simple fact that we have to get our head wrapped around here. My numbers, my research has us at about 1.1 million illegal crossings. The official numbers are less, around 750,000, but my numbers include law enforcement, boots on the ground estimates of getaways. It's from a very reasonable perspective. We're dealing with over 1 million illegal crossings. We're trending to have 2 million illegal crossings this year. We cannot allow this to happen. We will lose the sovereignty of our nation. It's our duty, our sworn oath and responsibility as congressional representatives in the People's House for the United States of America to serve the American citizenry and protect the sovereignty of our country. We must just take an objective viewpoint of this. It's very clear what has happened. I mean, what changed? What changed since last year and the year before? Why are we at a historic highs? Obviously, it's because of policies. You know what happened? January 20th happened, and then executive orders happened. So we're dealing with the results of that, and we've got to force action out of our executive. We can't just cover for them with scripted speeches. We must force action. Mr. Shahulian, I hope I quoted you correct, sir. You said, I took in my notes that you said that there are complicated causes, various and complicated causes for the illegal surge of immigrants we're facing at historic levels at our southern border. I mean, what do you mean by that? We have the same 1,954 miles of southern border that we had under President Trump. We had the same agents on the ground, the same sectors of command and control across our southern border. We got the same boots on the ground. What has changed? In your opinion, why are we facing historic highs here? If it's not, most Americans get it, that it's because we had a change in the executive. Can't you just admit that? And let's look at policies of the previous administration and try and fix this thing. I'll give you the floor, good sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the question. I'm just going to start off by saying that I respectfully disagree. Again, the causes of migration surges, which every administration from the Bush administration, the Clinton administration, the Trump administration, the Obama administration have all experienced, and the causes of those surges generally are primarily based on push factors. There are people that are fleeing deteriorating conditions. And given COVID, the deteriorating conditions in the sending countries have gotten worse.
You wouldn't think the surge will have anything to do with the invitation from the President of the United States?
I will point
Come
out
on, man.
I will point out
from your heart on this thing.
No,
Step
from
away from the talking points. Give America an answer.
I'm going to give you one. In May 2019, we saw higher numbers of encounters, and in fact, more unique encounters than we're seeing now. And that was after 2 years of Trump administration policies. Was that because of the Trump administration policies? We're seeing decreased levels of unaccompanied minors and families.
Yeah, we gradually got it under control. We gradually got it under control over the course of 4 years working with President Trump. We have this thing under control. We're facing historic levels of crossings. That's the simple fact. It's never been this high. And America's looking for answer. Madam Chair, I cannot see the clock, but I suspect that my time has expired.
37 seconds, sir. 37 seconds you have.
I want to give my remaining time in the interest of solidarity with the president's administration and his senior staff. I give the floor back to Mr. Shahuli, and you have my remaining 20 seconds, sir.
I will just say that the empirical evidence is that, people are fleeing deteriorating conditions. And until we address those and we provide alternative pathways, I will say that, I am a son of a Cuban refugee. I grew up in Miami. I was, as a child, when I was 9 years old, I remember the Mario boat lift, and that the city of Miami had 10 cities all around with Cuban refugees, and that we experienced an issue with Cubans taking to the high seas and risking their lives, and lots of death at the high seas. And the way that we addressed that was not just by clamping down. What we did was we entered in migration accords in the 1990s, where we provided 20,000 legal admissions a year. And it was by creating a lawful pathway that Cubans who were seeking freedom could invest their hopes into. We were able to bring down the number of people who sought to irregularly cross through the Florida Straits. And so we need a comprehensive strategy that does, look at various different avenues. And that's what we are attempting to do now. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Shahuli, and God bless you, sir. Let's talk more. Madam Chair, I yield.
Thank you for those questions and that testimony. The chair will now recognize other members for questions they may wish to ask the witnesses. As previously outlined, I will recognize member in order of seniority, alternating between the majority and minority. Members are reminded to unmute themselves when recognized for questions. The chair recognizes for 5 minutes the gentleman from California, Mr. Correa.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, for holding this most important hearing. I, like all of us in this committee, my heart goes out to those unaccompanied children. Well, Father, I pray for those children. And like many of you, I was in El Paso, Texas, looking at those children. I had the opportunity to meet Yuri and Yareli, that 2-year-old and that 5-year-old sisters that were thrown by smugglers over the 10-foot wall. And if it weren't for those border officers that were alert, they were able to see those children out in the desert, they would have perished. I also had the opportunity to go to Tijuana to see and interview a lot of the deported families under Section 42. This is an interesting challenge. It's a challenge that I agree with my colleagues. Nothing has changed in a long time. I'd say for the last 40 years, this has been an issue. I've been going to visit refugee children probably for the last 15 years. And so my question as an American and as Congress member trying to address public policy here long term, how do you fix the push factors? I agree. When you have 2 hurricanes, once in a lifetime situations happening one after another, when you have COVID-19, you go hungry. When you have corruption, you can't figure out how to run these economies efficiently. So, Mr. Julian, if I can ask you a couple of questions. Recently, Vice President Harris announced that the U.S. would provide $310 million of increased assistance to the Northern Triangle. And she announced that she would be working with 12 companies and organizations to invest these American dollars, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. My concern is we've been doing this for 40 years. What is it that we can do to assure that this money does not end up in a Swiss bank account? What do we do to make sure that it is not spent on overhead, on bureaucracy? What do we do to make sure that this money is invested where it needs to go? Thank you.
I appreciate the question, Congressman. I do. I would hope, if I could, to defer to my State Department colleague, the Deputy Assistant Secretary Duholm, who I think, I mean, they're leading on these efforts along with USAID. If that's okay.
Ms. Duholm? Yes, Ms. Duholm.
Yes, thank you very much, Congressman. Certainly, we agree with you that this is an incredibly important question as we go forward, and we are very focused on being responsible stewards of the taxpayers' money. We very much want to make sure that the money that is allocated to these ends achieve the goals. So for that purpose, we have very strict end-use monitoring in place. We also are looking at having someone directly from the OIG appointed for USAID to be monitoring those spending related to the Northern Triangle. We work very closely with those in the field through our embassies and missions through USAID to monitor all of the spending, and we work very closely to try and achieve the best possible results for
I hear what you're saying, Ms. Duholm. I hear what you're saying. My concern is strict accountability. Does that mean 50 cents out of every dollar is then going to be spent on overhead?
That's a real challenge, Congressman. I would say we have two issues. One is, if we want the accountability, we need organizations that are able to provide that sort of monitoring and accounting, and that often does come with a cost. But I share your interest in making sure that the maximum amount gets to those that we're seeking to benefit. We're constantly reevaluating and trying to get that balance right, and we'll continue to do that.
Thank you. Finally, ma'am, I would say a follow-up question here, which is, I think as Americans, we don't look south of the border until we see smoke, and we only act when we see fire. 40 years, in my opinion, of failed policy south of the border. We'll spend $1 trillion in Afghanistan, and we don't even look south of the border. When this is our backyard, we have to manage it and making sure if things are not going right, we step in. And as a legislature, I think we've just got to say to folks south of the border, we're going to be watching you and we're going to hold you accountable, because what you do affects us. You taking care of your citizens is not only your job, it's our job as well. And so I just look forward to working with you and trying to figure out a way for us to address these issues holistically and make sure as legislators, we force ourselves to always be looking south of the border. Thank you very much. And Madam Chair, I yield.
Thank you, Mr. Correa. The chair now recognizes for 5 minutes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Bishop.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Among the several 100,000 border enforcement encounters over the 4 complete months since the inauguration of President Biden, I think I've got the number, about 59,000 roughly were unaccompanied children. And of course, everybody understands they're staying in the United States. It would appear to me, and as I listen to testimony in this hearing and the questions, Biden administration policy is all aimed in the direction of speeding the passage of UCs from CBP to the Department of Homeland Security, excuse me, to Health and Human Services, Office of Refugee Resettlement. And of course, then they have a stay in an influx care facility, and then they're sent throughout the country to take up residence with some family member or a guardian or a sponsor, I guess you call it. Mr. Shahulian, in your testimony, you spoke of the top priority being to address the needs of children. And you said that the Biden administration has expanded capacities of agents to speed up the processing and the placement of unaccompanied children. Mr. Huffman cited what he called a success at moving unaccompanied children out of CBP custody faster, both by adding facilities and improving efficiency. And Mr. Shahulian, again, in your comments, you touted what has been done as having completely transformed border processes. And apparently, again, it's all aimed at eliminating overstays of unaccompanied children with the CBP. I would submit that this is unfortunately cruelly naive. And here's the distinction. The Trump administration policies the ranking member referred to were continually adapted to attempt to attenuate the flow of illegal crossings. But Biden policies, including all those Mr. Shulian referred to and touts as a success, don't even make an attempt to attenuate the flow. The success you tout is increasing the bandwidth, moving people in faster. And this tunnel vision is so bad that one of the policy changes that HHS has made is to waive criminal background checks for occupants who live in the households of sponsors of unaccompanied children placed by HHS. There's a Bloomberg article I saw from yesterday, a hearing, Energy and Commerce hearing, and I understand that the impact of this is that you're limited to basically internet search engines to try to determine who we're talking about you're placing people with. And we've been told by the CBP that the cartels dominate the crossing process, and they're throughout the United States engaging in trafficking, sex trafficking, indentured servitude enforcement, and we've dropped our guard to that degree. Mr. and I can't say your name. Is it Leckleitner? Is that what it's called? What's your name, sir?
Yes, sir. It's Leckleitner. That was right.
Thank you. Can you speak to that? I mean, given what's happening, aren't we subjecting all these children to the risk of criminality? As Andy Biggs said, they're making the United States government the logistics arm of the illegal cartels. I mean, that seems horrible to me.
Well, sir, thanks. That's a good question. We're the investigative arm of Homeland Security as it relates to transnational crime. I can't speak to whether or not there may be crimes that are going to be committed, but if HHS comes across those crimes, or if other of our partners do come across those crimes and report them to us, then we're going to follow up on that. We follow up on all of these very seriously. We are victim-centric as it relates to this vulnerable population. I can say from 20 to 21, our stats, probably partly due to COVID, unfortunately, it's complicating things, are going. They trend down a little bit. I can say that, but that's partly due to the COVID situation. But quite frankly, sir, we don't know the unknown. We only know what's been put before us, and I really can't speak to more than that.
Well, I guess I get that, but the problem is that we do know. And I think it's sort of it's a bureaucratic short-sightedness, if you'll forgive me, to just say, well, we're doing great, we're moving them through faster. Yeah, we don't know who we're sending them to. We know MS-13's out there. We know there's trafficking going on. We know that the kids are being, people are being sold or put into indentured servitude right here in our country, and that the cartels are active everywhere. And then we pat ourselves on the back and say that's humane. That is blinkered beyond belief. And it is a classic example of heart over mind. It is not a rational policy. There's not humanitarian in the slightest. Madam Chairman, I yield back.
Thank the member for his questions. The chair now recognizes the gentleman, the chair now recognizes for 5 minutes the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Cleaver.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I appreciate very much you holding this hearing. I think it's obviously timely. My friend, Mr. Correa, Representative Lou Correa from California, said that we've had failed policies for 40 years. As somebody who was born and raised in Texas, who's been into every little town along the border, I can tell you that it's been longer than 40 years that we've had problems and mismanagement of immigration, and it doesn't stop with my upbringing and growing up in Texas. But the Kansas City Southern Railway here in my district goes actually very shortly be going from Canada all the way through to Mexico. Right now they go to Laredo, and then all of the Americans get off the train, and then the Mexicans get on the train and it goes to finish its delivery. And so Henry Cuellar and I have been working a long time. I'm just prefacing my question with this comment that we have serious problems I think there seems to be a great interest in trying to make sure that we are successfully getting the other side looking bad as opposed to trying to get the policy straightened out. And one of the things that I'm concerned about, and I've been to all of the borders, I think it's a childish question to raise to everybody. Have you been to the border? Like, if you've been to the border, somehow you should get, like some cookies or milk or some dog biscuits. I'm not sure, but I think the issue is the policy, not visiting the border. But let me go on, Mr. Huffman. The trends in migration are cyclical. I have seen it all of my life, and during the spring, and then decreasing when the weather starts getting too hot and for travel, like around this time, and certainly in July and August, you're going to see it falling off. And so it has been at record levels in the past few months, and there are questions about whether the immigrants will continue to arrive into the hot heat of summer. But what I want to know is, what is DHS and CBP doing to better position themselves to treat these migrants more humanely than they've been treated previously, while at the same time processing them in an efficient manner?
Thank you, sir. I appreciate the opportunity to address that. So we've learned a lot of things over the years, as we've been a trend over the years to see more unaccompanied children that come into our custody. As we've mentioned previously, historically, our facilities were designed for a single adult population, because that was the historical trends over the years that we dealt with. And so we've had to adjust how we staff our folks, the type of facilities we use, and increase the capacity. So now when we stand up in these type of surgeries, when we stand up soft-sided facilities, they're specifically designed for unaccompanied children and family units, with how the pods are laid out, the air conditioning involved, the opportunities to have the medical examinations done on a regular basis, the medical care we provide to the children there, the ability to have observation of any psychological issues and challenges they may be facing as well. We've spent an enormous established a medical contract. We got like $481 million in medical contract established, of which we spent $163 million already just providing these medical services alone. So that alone in itself makes a big difference in how they're treated and what they say. We've adjusted the nutrition of the meals to address these things. We have a much better oversight, both internally ourselves with our juvenile coordinated office, plus oversight from the Flores monitors as well. That helps make sure we're in compliance with those guidelines. That helps make sure that we're at the best standard of the care that we can give for those guidelines. And basically, and I'll say this again, for us, the best thing we can do is move them out of our facilities onto professional child care specialists. And those efficiencies gained there allow us also to put our officers and agents back on the line quicker to be doing border enforcement missions, as opposed to being confined in these facilities caring for children as well. So there's a twofold effort for that. It's not just it helps the kids, but it also makes us more operationally efficient as well, and it does not diminish our operational capacity as much in doing so. I see I'm out of time, so I'll stop.
I think am I out of time, Madam Chair?
Yes.
Thank you kindly.
Thank you, Mr. Cleaver yields back. And I have to say, I agree with you, Mr. Huffman. When you talk to the men and the women of the Border Patrol, they will tell you day in and day out that they are not in the business of, they're in the law enforcement business, not in the business of caring for children. And so they actually appreciate not having the children processed out to HHS. And with that, the chair recognizes for 5 minutes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Clyde.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Ranking Member, for holding this important hearing. Since Inauguration Day, President Biden, by executive order, has acted to dismantle our nation's immigration system, spurring the crisis we are witnessing at the southwestern border. According to figures released this past May, CBP has encountered over 530,000 people along the southwest border since January 21st. That is a 20-year high, while deportations are at the lowest levels our country has seen in 20 years. CBP has also arrested over 5,800 individuals with criminal convictions, and that is only the number of people that we have caught. In FY20 through April, there were 21,045 unaccompanied alien children. But this year, FY21 through April, similar time frame, there have been 65,825 unaccompanied alien children. That is a 3 times increase. In rolling back successful Trump-era immigration policies, it is no secret the administration has emboldened the cartels to continue making billions of dollars trafficking narcotics and people, many of which are children, across our border. Truly, the Biden administration has made our federal government the last link in the chain of the human smuggling of children, and this is shameful. So, Mr. Shahulian, in your testimony, you say the Biden administration has employed a whole-of-government approach to solve issues related to the care, transfer, and placement of unaccompanied children, and it is strongly committed to preventing the exploitation of this vulnerable population. However, there are reports, and my colleague, Mr. Bishop, mentioned one from Bloomberg, that said that unaccompanied children are being released before their sponsors' background checks have been completed, and that certain requirements for background checks for caregivers have been waived at HHS emergency influx sites. Can you speak to those reports, sir?
Sir, so I do not know the content of those reports. I do think those are questions that are better directed to HHS. I'm happy to go and make sure that we can provide answers after consultation with HHS, but I'm not aware of the things that you were mentioning, sir.
Okay, well, but you mentioned a whole of government approach, right? I mean, numerous ones of you have mentioned a whole of government approach. Ms. Duholm, Mr. Huffman, we're all talking a whole of government approach. Shouldn't that mean that your agency is aware of and is helping to coordinate these efforts? Shouldn't the Department of Homeland Security have visibility into the vetting of children's sponsors?
Sir, I
we
can't
care about that, right?
Absolutely, sir. Absolutely, we care about that. And I will say that we have sent to HHS to help them, federalize their workforce in these efforts. We sent our most experienced asylum officers with deep experience in interviewing individuals, vetting people, running background checks, determining credibility, and determining family relationships. We've sent our best officers over to HHS to help them improve that process. The stories you mentioned, I'm just unaware of those, so I can't really speak to them just yet. But I'm happy to get back to you on those.
So you then don't have confidence that the unaccompanied children being released, that the background checks of their sponsors have been fully completed and vetted. Is that correct then?
Sir, again, I'm just going to say I do not lack confidence in our government's efforts or the work that our federal employees are doing either at DHS or at HHS. What I am saying is that I of the news articles of which you speak, I have not read. I would like to confer back with HHS, and I'm happy to provide an answer to this question.
Okay, all right. I would appreciate you getting back to us and letting us know whether or not we're cutting corners on background checks for the sponsors of these people. Thank you. The current crisis and surge of illegal aliens at the border have clearly enriched the transnational criminal organizations through their human trafficking and smuggling operations. So the next question I have is for Mr. Patrick Lechleitner. I believe I said that correctly, from HSI.
That's correct. Thank you.
By the way, I've been to the border twice, and I commend your efforts at the border. You guys really do a fantastic job there, I think, from what I saw, and I really appreciate it. These cartels need to be held to account. So, in your opinion, has the human smuggling of children increased in the last 5 months?
No, sir. We don't have appreciable data from our records that the smuggling of children has been increased, but we only know what is referred to us. So I would defer to CBP and what they're seeing at the border. But as far as referrals for investigations for us, we are seeing, I would say, a slight, if any, increase, but I can't speak to what's going on at the border for interdictions.
Okay. Some estimates have placed human smuggling and related activities at $1 billion a year industry. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would.
Okay. So have the cartels changed their operations along the southwestern border to maximize their profits and minimize their risk when it comes to human smuggling? And how have they done this?
I'm going to let the witness respond, but his time has expired. Mr. Leitner, would you like to respond?
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, the cartels have adapted and they recognize that there's a profit motive and increased profit to be seen from human smuggling. So when I'm speaking about the transnational criminal organizations, the cartels, the traditional drug organizations, they have seen that there's a profit motive there. So they've been adapting and utilizing some different techniques. Instead of just taxing their way through, they're facilitating them in other ways and also partnering with them. So we have seen some of that, but it's not unusual for transnational criminal organizations to do this. They care not for the commodity, they just care for the profit, and they will find whatever way it is to make that profit and make more of it. They are bound by no law.
Thank you, sir. The gentleman.
Okay. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes for 5 minutes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green.
Thank you ever so much, Madam Chair. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to be heard, and I greatly appreciate your hosting this hearing. Madam Chair, when Cubans were coming to this country by the thousands, we didn't turn them back if they could reach our land, our shore. We adopted something called a wet foot, dry foot policy. If you could get 1 foot on dry land and the other foot remained in the water, we welcomed you. In fact, it became an invitation to Cubans to come to this country, and you could stay because of the wet foot, dry foot policy.
Terrible policy.
I heard someone, dear brother, I hope you would allow me to continue without interruption. We were good Samaritans at that time, it seems. We didn't ask what will happen to us if we allow the Cubans. We were asking what will happen to them if we don't allow them. This is what a certain person said with reference to persons who were moving along a certain dangerous route, and this person was injured and beset upon by thieves. What will happen to the person who's hurting if we don't help? But let me go further, because this is what's really important. In October of 1980, we had something called the Murillo Boat Lift. At that time, 125,000 Cubans came to this country between October 15th and October 31st. Here is what is really interesting about the 125,000 refugees, I might add. Many of them were released from jails. Many of them were released from mental health hospitals. Check the empirical evidence. What I say is true. Released from jails and mental health hospitals. We didn't call them illegal aliens. We called them refugees. I'm not the guy who's going to see a baby thrown over a wall and dropped and then walk over and pick the baby up and throw him back over the wall. I'm not. And by the way, I don't think you would either. Any of the persons on this committee, I don't think you have that kind of heart. But my point is this. If we can have wet foot, dry foot, if we can find a way to accommodate others, if we could allow the jails to be open and not call them illegal aliens, can we not be as courteous and kind to these babies who are coming and not call them illegal aliens? That's just from my heart to everybody else's. If your heart rejects my thoughts, I understand. But I see these as babies, as children, trying to get to a better life. Their parents don't send them because they want their children to travel along the Jericho Road from deep South America to the United States. They want their children to have a better life. So I would ask this of Mr. Chahoulian. I believe you're the person who, Chahoulian, excuse me. You're the person who brought up the wet foot, dry foot policy without saying it. Is what I said correct, sir?
About the wet foot, dry foot policy, sir?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I will say, I mean, you are, yes, there was a period of time, and we do have the Cuban Adjustment Act that allows people who are paroled in to adjust status after a year as well. But yes, for many, many years, there was a policy that basically allowed Cuban nationals to stay if they reached dry land. Yes.
Yes, and the policy was known as wet foot, dry foot, because if you had 1 foot on dry land and 1 in the water, you had the right to take that other foot out of the water, walk on in, and the invitation was such that you could become an American citizen. True?
Sir, if you made it, on whether you had to have 1 foot or not, I'm not 100% sure of those facts, but I will say that if you if you were paroled into the United States, I mean, there were some people that were denied if they, they.
Yes, the people who were denied were called persons from Haiti. Haitians didn't have the benefit of wet foot, dry foot.
Well, there were some people. I mean, we determined that individuals pose a public safety risk. I mean, there were some people who were.
Well, those who were released from the jails, did they pose a public safety risk?
Sir, there were from the Cuban Mario boat lift, there were about 3,000 individuals who were determined to pose a significant public safety risk and were held excluded. So not everyone was allowed to stay.
But some of those who were from jails were. What about the mental health hospitals?
Sir, again, there were a number of, I'm saying there were a number of individuals that were held at the border and determined to be excluded because of the public safety issue. Not everyone stayed. I just want to be clear about that. Of the Cuban,
I don't agree with you that not everyone stayed, but of the 125,000, my dear sir, you and I both know that the overwhelming majority of them stayed.
Overwhelming majority.
Just pick on the exceptions and say, oh, some didn't stay. Some of those with mental health issues stayed, and some of those who were out of jail stayed. True?
Mr. Green, your time has expired.
You have been more than generous, Madam Chair. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes for 5 minutes the gentlewoman who's been waiting very patiently from New York, Ms. Clark.
I'd like to thank you, Madam Chair, for really bringing this very timely hearing to the American people. And I think, we all need to take a deep breath and, search our souls, as Congressman Green has said, about our collective humanity. When we can look at children and see them as a threat to our national security, and all they're seeking and their parents are seeking are to bring them to safety, to connect them with loved ones in this nation as the conditions of their homes of origin continue to deteriorate. And we can't look at ourselves and say we would sacrifice the same way for our own children. Then clearly, there's some soul searching that needs to be done. Let me just put it that way. But my first question is for Mr. Shahulian. While most unaccompanied children arriving at our border have family in the United States, a number of these children arrive at the border with close family members, such as a grandparent, aunt, or uncle. Yet, DHS policy only recognizes a parent and child relationship, despite the fact that a grandparent or an uncle would qualify as a sponsor for the child. Is DHS considering a change in policy to help keep these families together and expedite processing of children in your custody?
Thank you, Congressman, for that question. So I will say that it is more than DHS policy. It is the law, right? Under the Trafficking Victim Protection Reauthorization Act of 2008. A child who is encountered with not accompanied by a parent or a legal guardian, and for whom a parent or legal guardian is not willing to show up to pick them up, that individual by law is an unaccompanied child, and by law we are to transfer them to HHS. That said, we have been in discussions with HHS to look at things that we can do to prevent family separations as much as possible. But by law, we are required to treat such children as unaccompanied minors and to send them to HHS.
So I understand that in limited circumstances, these family units have been released together when it was in the best interest of the child. What actions can DHS take so that more of these family units are released together while ensuring children can still receive sufficient legal protection and care?
So again, we are in conversations to look at what can be done. We've been in conversations with HHS about co-locating in certain facilities. We do, when we have unaccompanied children who are encountered with other family members, we do try to ensure that there's contact with those other family members. But again, by law, we are required. We can't, by law, release them. We must transfer them to HHS, and it is HHS's legal responsibility to find a suitable sponsor for those children. I think some of the stories you're mentioning are some individuals who are provided parole through ports of entry, and there may be situations, but this, by and large, is not a practice for individuals who are encountered inside the U.S.
Thank you. Ms. Duhalholm, in order to address the root causes of migration, we must ensure that there are legal avenues for individuals to come to the United States. Can you please expand on the administration's efforts to increase these legal options, including reinstating the Central American Minors Program?
Thank you, Congresswoman. Certainly, I'd be happy to. There are, I would say, three main areas that we're working to expand legal options for residents of Central America to be able to come to the U.S. legally. And as you mentioned, the Central American Minors Program is one of those for families who have parents legally in the U.S. to be able to petition for their children to join them through the Central American Minors Program as part of the U.S. Refugee Assistance Program. When that program was closed in 2018, we had about 5,000 applications, and we have begun reprocessing those, and we look forward to hopefully expanding that in the near future to be able to accommodate other legal folks with legal status in the U.S. to be able to bring their children. We're also expanding. We're expanding to seasonal visas, and we're also working to increase processing time for immigrant visas that are backlogged within the realm of our COVID limited processes.
So under the Central American Minors Program, how many cases have been completed under this administration, and how many cases were pending a decision when the Trump administration terminated the program?
Sure. So under the current administration, we have processed so far a little over 1,000, and there had been, I believe, 5,000 pending at the time.
Okay, very well, very well. When can we expect for the new administration to accept new applications for the program?
I believe we'll be seeing an announcement imminently, Congresswoman.
Very well. Let me thank you all for your expert witnessing here today, your testimony. And with that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Representative. I want to thank the witnesses for the valuable testimony and the members for their questions. The members of the subcommittee may have additional questions for the witnesses, and we ask that you respond expeditiously in writing. The committee record shall be kept for 10 days. I apologize. I wanted to give more ending remarks, but I have been called for a vote in my markup. I want to thank our members and everybody for participating. And with that objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned.